So this is going to be a brief overview on Jupyter on nanoHUB. And during this, I'm going to cover the basic questions on, for people who don't know what Jupyter is, what is it, how do you use it, why should you use it, and what have we done on nanoHUB that's different, and how can you use it to build things that are different than regular notebooks, what we call Jupyter tools. So it's always challenging to try to describe what Jupyter is to people, because unless you've seen it, it really doesn't. It's not like anything else that most people are familiar with. So this is right from the Jupyter web page text. It's an open source web application that allows you to create and share documents with live code, visualizations, all that kind of good stuff. So I think the best thing to do is just really kind of demonstrate it, and I'm always learning new tricks you can do with Jupyter, so I hope you'll learn a few things too. In my experience, Jupyter Notebooks they're fantastic tools for education, documenting workflows, interactive exploratory work. I use them all the time when I've got, I'm trying to work out some algorithm, or I've got some data and I don't want to try to figure out what the best way to visualize it is. I just create a new notebook, I do all my work there, and later it's really easy to refer back to it, see my notes, see my data, figure out what I did, and maybe reuse it in another project. Currently on the hubs, we have Python, R, and Octave or MATLAB installed. There are some licensing issues with MATLAB, so if you want the full power of the language, you kind of need to use Octave right now. Other languages are compatible with Jupyter Notebooks, and they can be installed if they're required for some project. And when you're in the notebook, you have the ability to call really any functions, external simulations, whatever. So you can easily compile a program written in, for example, C++, and then call it from the notebook and process its output and everything. So I'm going to go right into an example first, and then I'll go back and explain more about how the hub does things. So this is the default view when you open a Jupyter Notebook. You have a menu bar and toolbar up here with some editing commands. It's kind of an IDE in a development environment. And everything in here, everything in the notebook is a linear cell structure. You've got this text here. These are some Python commands, and each cell needs to be run. So I click on the run button, and it runs that. Nothing happens here. This is what's called a Markdown cell, which is where you put your documentation. And you can toggle between the different cells up here with this code and Markdown button. And when you run a Markdown cell, all it really does is render it. So Markdown is, if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of a simplified version of HTML. It's the web page language, hypertext markup language. So you can mix HTML and Markdown commands, and you can add in LaTeX equations like we've done here. And when you render that cell, you see the equation. So then you just go on to the next cell and run it. Now, this is the default way that all notebooks work. It's very linear. Like I said, it's great for education, documentation. You can go in here and change one of these and rerun the cell and see what the difference is. And so I've added a call here called interact. And I've said that these three variables, I want them to be arranged instead. And now I've automatically got little sliders, and I can go in and modify the sliders and see how that affects my plotting algorithm here. And just to show some more interesting things we can do, I've made this into a three-dimensional version here, and you can see the same plot in 3 dimensions. And then, oops, sorry about that. It's the wrong button on the mouse. You can just drag it around and look at it. So notebooks can be very interactive. But this inline structure, stepping through the cells by hand, Like I said, great for documenting workflows and your approach, and great for exploratory work. Not so great for, it's not the normal thing we're used to when we get a program. We usually just click a button and we run it. And I'll show how we handle that later. So at this point, I'm going to terminate this notebook. This is actually a notebook. I'm running it in a slideshow mode, where each cell, each of those documentation cells, those markdown cells, it just magnifies them and puts them in the center of the screen. So it's nice to you can just turn your notes into a presentation very easily. So I'm going to go ahead and terminate this whole thing. And when I click on the terminate button here, I go back to my nanoHUB dashboard. So to run Jupyter, if you don't have it already, you can find it here. And you see a bunch of different Jupyters. Don't run the lab right now unless you know what you're doing. We're just looking for the default Jupyter Notebook. You might see that there are different Jupyter Notebooks, and what's going on there. As Jupyter Notebook gets enhanced and developed and new versions come out, we update our environment, and we update with the new Jupyter, but we also update with the new scientific libraries, a whole new set of almost 1,000 scientific libraries that we put in the environment now. Now, in order not to break older things, which may rely on specific older versions, we just add new environments. Right now, if you click on Jupyter Notebook, you'll get the latest one, which is 5.1. If you ever want to go back and run Jupyter Notebook with the Anaconda 4.4 environment, you just click here and run it. Any published tools will be automatically linked to the environment they're published with, so they'll always be available. So I'm going to go ahead and run this now. Okay, so this is the index or start page. And the name says index at the top. This is a Jupyter Notebook, and if you may notice that it doesn't have all the editing buttons and everything, because we've published it in a way that said, don't render that stuff. We don't want to see it. In fact, you shouldn't be able to go in this and actually change any of it. So this is just an informational page. You'll get it every time you start a new Jupyter session. Before I go to the files, I want to show you a couple things. First of all, you should take a look at this now and then, because this information will change. There are some preferences. You can get them under the file preferences each notebook has them. The preferences are global though, or you can just click here and run the preferences, and you'll get another Jupyter Notebook, which has a few options for customizing your experience. You can change the key map. I used to have VI there, but there were some issues with it. People kept complaining. So until I get it right, it's out of the selection. These are just the editing keys for when you're in a cell and adding code or markdown. There's some dashboard tools. If you're developing, you'll want them on. Otherwise you may not need them on. If you're just creating documents, you may want to play around with the document tools and the equation numbering. And these will just add these things to your toolbar so you'll see them. We also have user's manual. This is a good place for, I don't think you probably won't need the basics here, but I still refer to it now and then to find out what I can do with markdown cells. And there's some links, there's some information about publishing, which is a little out of date. I'm working on updating it now. And there's some other links to things which are basically also in the examples. Just want to show you things you can do with markdown cells. If you're not familiar with the markdown language, there's not a lot of great resources, but here's all like the kind of things you need to know about putting images and things. And as you go in each one and you're wondering how is that done, you can just double click on the cell and see, oh, that's how it's done. There's a little bit of HTML in there. All right, let's go back to the There's also information about versions. I talked about that a bit with the different releases. Each Jupyter is actually, rather than based on the Jupyter release, it's the 4.1.4.4.5.1. That's referring to the Anaconda release. And if you're not familiar with this, anaconda.com, they have a data science distribution, a complete development environment, Mac, Windows, Linux, tons of libraries and stuff. That's our starting point for building our environment. We take that, we install a ton of stuff from there, and then we install a bunch of other stuff. The releases are, there's actually two different releases. On the nanoHUB, we have a slightly bigger environment that has a lot of molecular dynamics tools, things like that, that are not necessarily needed in other hubs. But anyway, other hubs can customize their releases if they need to. So I lost my sorry about that. I kind of lost my presentation somewhere. Well, that's okay. Clicked on too many tabs. Sorry about that. I'll be back in a second. Okay, actually, this is where I was. I'm sorry. So we're going back to the home directory here. We click on that, on the big link across the top, and it gets us to our home directory. And you should see all the files that you've got in your workspace on nanoHUB. I've got a ton of stuff here, and you can actually go through here and edit some. You can go in and actually use the editor and edit things. You can look at images, all that nice stuff. You can sort them by names and dates they're modified and everything. But I'm just going to go right in here into the notebooks directory. Now, normally my notebooks directory has like 100 folders with tons of stuff in them. I cleaned it out just for this. The notebooks directory will automatically be created for you, and under it there'll be this notebook examples. And you can, if you want, go through here and look at some examples this way rather than going through the index page. And you can run these examples. You can copy them, edit them, and do other things you want. So I do recommend that you take a look at the examples just to see the different things that can be done. Because there's some pretty cool stuff. A lot of nice plugins that allow you to do things in notebooks that you wouldn't expect. So this underscore notebooks examples will be in there for everyone. And you can go in here now and you can create a new notebook. Just new Python 3, Python 2, R, Octave, whatever. And you create the notebook and you'll just get a blank notebook ready to go. And there it is. And I can delete that, rename that, or whatever if I need to. So I'm going to go back into my, right here, this is my presentation I was doing. So I'll just launch that again. Put it in slideshow mode. So I do want to show a quick example of Octave. You'll see up here it says it's indicating the Octave kernel. So Octave, if you're not familiar with it, is a MATLAB clone. It's free and open source, so we can use it with and let anyone use the full power of Octave without worrying about licensing issues that we get into with MATLAB. So you can do, basically the same things you can do in MATLAB. It's in the Jupyter environment. It's not going to be as slick an environment as what you get with the MATLAB on your desktop, but it is something that you can show to other people, publish on, for the world to see and use and interact with. So that brings us into why would you use Jupyter? I covered that, why you might want to use it, what's good about it, but why would you use it on nanoHUB? Why not just go to the anaconda.com, download the distribution, and use it on your desktop, on your laptop? And I used to do that. I did that for many years. I knew other people who did the same things, and we would share files, and people would put files on GitHub. There's like 100,000 notebooks or something on GitHub now. And you download them and you try to run them, and half the time you find out you can't run it because there are tens of thousands of Python libraries. And if you're using Python, you might be using R, and there's many thousands of R libraries. And maybe you're not running the right version, or maybe you don't have that cool plugin that visualizes those molecules. And you got to go change your environment just so you can actually run that notebook the way the person who wrote it had it. I've run into the same issues with older notebooks from a couple years ago. Like, oh, that doesn't work because I had a different version of this library installed and now it doesn't run, and I got to go through and update it just so I can try to use it again. So really the key thing here is reusability. Reproducibility, reusability. You want to have something that you can go back and always use, that the environment hasn't changed on you, and you want something that you can share with other people, and they can run it and see it exactly like you intended it to be run. So a lot of people have done this. We've got like 40 some so far, and I'll give a couple quick examples. When you publish, most of you should be familiar, probably everybody's familiar with this. When you publish it, you get the page like this, and you launch the tool. It's exactly like it works with Rapture. Now, I didn't write these notebooks. These are from this Jump project. What I did was make just a little customization to each one to show how they would actually load it. And that's just this first two lines here. And so you see it's just a normal notebook. You have to go through and run each cell. This one has been saved. One thing with notebooks I should mention is that you can save them with the output of the previous run, as long as it's not a dynamic thing where you drag it around or something. So a lot of those 3D visualizations, this doesn't work. But if it's just a regular 2D output like this has been saved with the previous output, and I can run it and reproduce that. Or I could go back and change some of the variables and go back and run it with the new parameters and see how different it is. So as you can see, there's actually a whole bunch of notebooks here. They were all published as one project, and that's just, we just use these little links. These are the Markdown syntax for hypertext links. So very easy to do. Just another quick example here. This was a surf project, I think, from last year, I believe. I'm just going to run the whole thing rather than step through these cells because I think some of them are hidden. Ah, I see. There we go. I'm not sure why this came up this way. I think I confused it by running it again while it was actually running, but this should still work. Okay, so they made a little GUI, a lot of nice output, but still very much this linear structure. So I'm going to talk about how we can change it to a tool mode next. So tools, applications, sometimes called dashboards in the web world, they run like typical desktop applications. There's a graphical interface, a bunch of buttons and things. You change some values, you click things, and the display updates. Maybe you click a button and some more options appear, and maybe you submit it and it goes off to a cluster and things happen and it comes back, and then you get an output and you click some more buttons and change the output and everything. So it's driven by a GUI. It's not like stepping through cells and everything. So how do we make something like that on Jupyter? So the current way we do stuff like that is we use Rapture. So I think probably everybody's probably familiar with Rapture here. And so I'm not going to really go into that too much, but Rapture is basically it's a wall of buttons. There's some interactivity. Basically, you set your inputs. You click simulate, and then you have an outputs. And if it's got all the inputs you like and it's got all the outputs that you would want to use, then Rapture can be a very easy way to do these things. If, on the other hand, it doesn't have all those things, then you have to go to something like Jupyter. One thing that Rapture does have is UQ, uncertainty quantification. You can set up Rapture pretty easily to do basic uncertainty quantification. And there's also repeated runs are cached automatically with Rapture. And we don't have anything like that set up yet with Jupyter. UQ can be done, but it requires more work. So we have this thing we call Jupyter Tools. Jupyter Tools are Jupyter Notebooks, at least that's what they start with. But when we publish them, we want to tell it to don't display the code, don't display the IDE, just display the user interface that we've created. And we create the user interface using some tools called HUBwidgets. And they're primarily written in Python. So right now, to make a Jupyter tool, you're going to have to write some Python. That's a limitation we have now, and that will probably go away in the future. But for now, there has to be a Python interface. You can have 90% of the code in MATLAB and just a little bit in Python, and people have done that. That's not a problem, but still you're going to have to know a little Python to do this. So a quick example of how that works, of what they look like. I'm sorry, is it? What was that, Eric? Never mind.
Sorry, I don't know if I was doing that, but I think we've missed.
Okay, I don't know what I can do to fix that. Is the volume low, or is it just
so? Yeah.
Okay, I'll speak more slowly and.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so this, in this case, they wrote this notebook and then a very linear structure. Then they wrote a widget version, and then they wrote a tool version, and they linked to all of it in their published tool. So actually, this tool is linked to another tool. So I'll just go ahead and do the notebook deployed as a tool. So it's a very simple thing. This is something I basically just helped with the publishing. It was for a class, but I like the example that you can actually show different ways of looking at it. Okay, so this is the pretty much as basic as it can get for a tool. You've got some equation, and you've got some sliders that adjust the parameters of the equation, and you've got a plot which is being updated in real time as I drag the sliders around. You can do a little bit of resizing and things here. But as you can see, there's no IDE, no way to edit this, no way to see the code. It works. You don't know that this is a Jupyter Notebook. It works exactly like you'd expect a tool. So, one more example of that. This was actually the first one I wrote just as a proof of concept. So I'm showing this one just because it's pretty much the first. You would not expect, I think, that this is a Jupyter Notebook, except it says Jupyter up here. Otherwise, you really wouldn't have any idea that the structure in this is all built using Jupyter. Nope, don't want to do that. Yes, I do. If I terminate the session, I'm terminating just the tool session. I have to be careful that I don't accidentally terminate all of my Jupyter stuff, but I have my presentation running in a different Jupyter session, so that's not a problem. So how does this work? How do you turn a linear presentation into a nice, slick graphical interface? And it's really all about building the GUI. So here's an example I did, just walking through it. And I build each piece. This example is just a demo. It's not an actual scientific application, and it's just to show the way this all flows. I think it's the best example I have of that right now. So I'm building each GUI element. I'm just making some sliders, horizontal, vertical, some text widgets, or some float text, which means that only floating point numbers in that text widget, and some different types of buttons. I must have missed one. One of the problems with this is there. So the problem with, again, a problem with regular notebooks is you have to step through each of the cells. Otherwise, something doesn't get defined and it fails at some point. But we won't have to do that when we publish these tools. So I've defined all these things, and then I packed them into these boxes. Okay, I'm using IPyWidgets. That's what widgets is. My IPyWidgets, and you can just Google IPyWidgets and get their documentation. It's got all of these, the documentation for all of these GUI elements here, the sliders, the input boxes, and everything. And then they've got vertical boxes and horizontal boxes. So I packed a bunch of stuff in vertical boxes, and then finally I put them in. I have three vertical boxes packed in a horizontal box, and there they are. And if I take this and resize it, let's see if I can do that. If you can see that, all the elements resize nicely. The vertical boxes I have this space between thing, which it's going to keep the space, it's going to adjust the space between them when I resize them. So it's like a rubber band box that expands and contracts as you need it. So I'm going to run all the rest of these cells, and it's all the same way. Each one of them building up the GUI elements that I want. And I'm showing them at each step here, just so as a demo, just so people can see what it is. And then at the end, I've got all these things and I combine them. I got all these rows and I combine them all in one big vertical box. And there's my GUI. Resize it a little bit. Okay, I don't usually use a Mac for this, but there's, oh. Yeah, because it's because it's all running in a browser, you can always resize your Jupyter work. You can, if the fonts are too big or too small or anything. So I wanted to fit the whole thing in here nicely. So now we've got this nice little GUI. We can visualize different things. It's just for fun. So how would you publish? So, but there's all this other stuff. How do you publish that? Well, that's where these dashboard buttons come in. Over here, you've got this link. This is the regular view. And if you click this dashboard view, you can get a grid layout. And that's just going to put all of the stuff in kind of a grid here, and you can drag everything around and try to make sense of this mess. But I don't recommend this anymore. If you didn't use the layout, the widgets with the vertical boxes and the horizontal boxes, and you wanted to try to pack them all in yourself like this, you could try it, but I found it's not reliable and it's kind of frustrating, and things don't necessarily resize the way they should. So I'm recommending everyone actually use report layout. And report layout is going to do a vertical stacking of all of your cells. And I've already actually gone through and taken out all of them, but there's 42 hidden cells here. And if I want, I can put them back in. But that cell obviously has no output. I could, if I want this basic widget demonstration here, I can put that in and keep that title. And I've hidden all the others except for the one at the end. So then when I click on this dashboard view, or you could call that tool view, then all I get are the cell outputs that I've selected. So there's that one at the beginning I put, and here's that big one at the end. And so when we go through I'm not going to go through this, but in the publishing documentation, it basically tells you how to set the notebook so this is the only thing that's shown. And to get back from here, you go back to View Notebook because your dashboard buttons went away. So you go back to View Notebook. And there you are. You can edit, and you get it looking exactly the way you want, like this. And then when you go to publish it, you just set a flag, and this is all that will appear when people run it. And they won't even get this bar here at the top. But we need that right now so we can get back in the notebook.